history department for inviting me. And today I'm going to present the history of 3 individuals and their intertwined life trajectory from the World War II through the Chinese Civil War and the Korean War and into the Cold War. So these 3 men, actually I had an honor to interview only one of them, the third person. Actually, the reason I'm doing this new project, which is related to my first project, why? Because all 3 of them actually served in both the World War II and the Korean War. But of course, when I started, I did not realize this. I interviewed him, and he told me he served in World War II. I didn't pay much attention, but of course, these were recorded. I transcribed the text, but eventually, 10 years later, I realized, wow, actually there's something can be done. And then I found more archival documents, so that became possible. But as Judd explained, it's still a very early stage of my new project. So I've written one paper. I didn't distribute this paper, but I can explain briefly the background of this research, the genesis. So in my first book, The Hijacked War, I made this argument that the Korean War could be seen as 2 wars or 2 halves. The first half was fought over territory, over North Korean territory, South Korean territory. The second half was fought over prisoners. I mean, if you look at this, it's obvious to all specialists, but no one has come up with such a very succinct summarization. So not necessarily everybody will agree with this, but I hope you remember this. The first half of the Korean War was over territory, over Korean territory. The second half was over Chinese prisoners. And that's one of the reasons why the Korean War became a forgotten war, because the US government didn't want you to remember, no, the war was fought over Chinese prisoners. And the Korean War was prolonged for more than 1 year. And during the second half of the war, 14,000 American soldiers, GIs, died in Korea. For what? The territory did not change in the second half of the war. The only major outcome was that 14,000 Chinese prisoners went to Taiwan. So essentially, can be argued for 1 Chinese prisoner's so-called freedom to not return home. 1 American prisoner did not return home. They died. This is something the US government didn't want you to know, didn't want anybody to know. Now, let's move on. As just explained, for the book, I interviewed about 88 prisoners, but after the book's publication, or after I submitted the final manuscript, I continued to interview more prisoners. So right now, I hit 100 mark. Not everybody's a prisoner, mostly prisoners, but also include interpreter, 1 prison guard, 1 interrogator. So one of them is Mr. Huang Tiancai. So he was one of those interrogators, also interpreters. And for this project, I think I want to get into a little bit about the literature review, not really literature review, what's the significance. Judd advised me against this. But I thought it's still, a week ago, on Monday, I gave a presentation in Johns Hopkins. They said, only 5 minutes, we just need the background, this context. But I think I want to try this very briefly. So actually, this story is about 3 individuals, but this is the beginning of the new project, but the larger project about the 4,000 prisoners, 4,000 interpreters. So what kind of interventions are going to make? That's not, I'm not very good at theorizing this, but I think it is important to tell the stories from below. We always talk about history from below, or bottom up history. But from the traditionally, the historiography on China is heavily diplomatic or political. For example, this classic works on the theater, China, Burma, India theater, or Barbara Tuchman's Stilwell. So mostly those are the famous people. If you read his books, you don't see names of any common soldiers or anybody below colonel. You don't see any names. Of course, the most famous ones, Mao, Chiang Kai-shek, it's all based using top political military documents. So actually, in recent years, everybody have been trying to tell a story from below, or move the perspective a little lower. People have been trying this. For example, Daniel Leary, in her book, China's Civil War, she used all these intellectuals writing. They were not political elite, but still they were educated elite based on their writings, not on oral history. Or Rhonda Mitter published this Forgotten Ally about 10 years ago, but it focused on the three top leaders, Chiang Kai-shek, Wang Junwei, and Mao. And Hans Vanderman's new book, China at War from 37 to 52. See, this is the British version. You can see on the cover, there's the two, Chiang Kai-shek, Mao. However, for the American version published a little bit later, the cover image is a common soldier in the Battle of Shanghai. But in his book, he's trying to bring the perspective a little lower, but he used two case studies, two threads throughout the book. One is Qi Bangyuan, this writer, and another one is Chen Kewen, mid-level official, but still they were political elite. So what I'm trying to do is, if we can get even lower, but as of course, even the interpreters, they're all educated elite, right? But still, we're trying to get it lower and lower, closer to the grassroots, closer to the bottom. And this is also a story about mobility or migration in war. So this book by Dominic Yang about the Great Exodus from China is making big impact. Actually, he wrote this book in response to the popular book by Long Yintai, 大江大海. So that's the Chinese Civil War, the movement, the focus on 1949, before and after. Also, Qi Bangyuan, the author is heavily quoted in Hans Vanderman's book, that she documented her own life from Manchuria all the way through the Civil War, all the way to Taiwan. So that's about her own life. But in this story, let's say 3 individuals, but hopefully in the future we're going to have 4,000 individuals. I still need to figure out how to effectively weave these stories together and keep a focus. That's something I'm going to work on. Another interesting theme is the history of the interpreter, interpreting. A couple of years ago, Harriet Harrison published her book, The Perils of Interpreting. So the subtitle is Extraordinary Lives of Two Translators Between the Qing China and the British Empire. So she did 2 interpreters. Today I'm trying to do 3. I hope you can. But in her book, as you can see, she's trying to explain the interpreter actually is so critical, right, so pivotal in any kind of international transaction. However, they were everywhere, but they're not nowhere to be seen in history. Right? Any kind of international interaction, interpreters play such a critical role, but usually remain anonymous and invisible. So how to shed more light on them and highlight their agency, if there were some agency. So that's what I'm trying to do. So today is an attempt on the case studies of 3 and how their life trajectory were intertwined and how they crossed paths throughout time in different wars. So let me start with the end of the Korean War. This picture probably people are very familiar with. Every year, July 27th, you're going to see this picture, right? The signing of Armistice Agreement. And it is Life magazine cover spread. You can see the focus is on this one ROK soldier, the captain's ROK soldier. But 2 weeks later, one reader wrote a correction, said that's not an ROK soldier. Actually, he was a Burmese birth of the Chinese interpreter for the UN delegation. Yeah. So actually, he has the distinction. He served throughout the negotiation. He was the chief negotiator on the UN team, and he was from Burma, actually through China. So that's we're going to explain in detail. So you can see why interpreter is important. Just to sign the document, why it's important. Actually, it's very technical. Without him, it's impossible to sign the document. Why? You can see he's standing on the side of the General Harrison who signed the document. Why he's always there? Why? Because without him, you don't know where to sign it. This is the old Chinese version, right? The Chinese, Korean, and English. He has a pointer here is to sign your name. It's the old Chinese. So it's very technical, right? But nobody thought about this, actually. So actually, this reader wrote to say he pointed where the General Harrison should sign his name. So actually, he started as the chief interpreter for the UN delegation even before the Panmunjom talks. So on July 8th, 1951, the preliminary meeting took place in Kaesong, and he was there. So that's why this is a poster. That's him. And so this reader wrote, by misusing the picture, you denied Kenny Wu the chance for public recognition of extremely valuable service. Yeah, but this is letter to the editor. I don't know if he's ever recognized for this great contribution he made. So now we're going to trace his brief history. So what happened is, so he was a Burmese-born Chinese diaspora. So after Pearl Harbor, China became an ally, and Japan swept through Southeast Asia. By early 1942, Japan invaded Burma, which was the only land, the lifeline for the nationalist China. And he was born in northeast Burma, and he went to school in University of Rangoon. When the Japanese came, the Japanese attacked Burma, actually China, China and the U.S. under General Stilwell, trying to defend this route. And in a British colony, as you all know probably, it became a disaster. So the defense crumbled and the people fled back to China. And he fled to China as a refugee. And on the Burma Road, which was built by his father. His father was an engineer in the British Empire. And they crossed this bridge, Huitong Bridge, on the Salween River. Their vehicle was the fifth to last before the engineers blew up this bridge to prevent the Japanese from pursuing them. And once in China, he enrolled in Kunming. He enrolled at National Associate University, Xin'an Lianda. So this university actually is a conglomeration with three universities from Beijing and Tianjin. They migrated south when China first, the Sino-Japanese War broke out. The Second Sino-Japanese War broke out in 1937. The university migrated to the south. So he joined this university, and he entered the electronic engineering department, WWII, right? That's the hottest department. He was a freshman. So actually you can find the documents, his name, Wu Jianzhan. But actually it took me a long time to figure out what's his Chinese name. Once they figure it out, you can find more documents about him. He's listed as a freshman. So actually his origin was Guangdong Taishan. So he's a Cantonese, but they were born in Burma. So he joined. So when the war broke out, he actually joined the U.S. Army directly. But as the war progressed, and the U.S. allies, the British allies needed more Chinese interpreters. So the Chinese government, the military commission, they mobilized more than 4,000 Chinese interpreters to serve throughout the war. And China became an ally. There was so much interaction between the allies and the Chinese people, and the Chinese military and the people. So our colleague, Zach Freeman, wrote this wonderful book on Tormented Alliance, documenting the complex relationship between the Chinese and the Americans. But here, to them, is very focused on the interpreters. And he has a chapter on the interpreters, focused on the problems. But here is a brief history. Even before Pearl Harbor, actually, a small number of volunteers were mobilized to serve the Flying Tigers, and this Claire Chennault Flying Tigers, which is a mercenary force, Air Force. And some of the famous people, if you in the East Asian studies, probably you know Professor Wu Ningkun, right? So this literary scholar. Actually, he was one of the earliest volunteers. Yeah, he wrote a famous book called A Single Tear. He passed away just 5 years ago. So people served all over in the southeast China, southwest China, and Burma, and some in India. So large number of students were mobilized from the top universities, like Southwest University, Yanjing, or missionary schools, and also other government schools and national schools. Yeah. So actually I found this document just literally Tuesday from the U.S. National Archives. You can see this is not the complete roster, but at a certain point you can see the large number were from the Southwest University, the top university. It's kind of like what's the top school in America? The top three schools combined: Wisconsin, Michigan. Okay. I went to Michigan for undergrad, so that's why. And most students study like foreign languages, economics, right? But the large number of students from the top universities. Yeah. And here's a list of their ages, right? You got people under 18 were 4. It's at 1 point, right? You get a sense the percentage, that's not a complete number. The large, I think the largest number is 23. That means the college seniors that were mobilized to serve. And I don't know if you have any undergrad students, so that's like when you are undergrad, you're mobilized to join the war. Some people were killed, small number were killed. And they served in different units. Some were with the OSS, or the intelligence, but mostly with the army, right? Chinese Army in India, that work with the liaison officers. So here's this. Now I'll move on to the second case, Li Xiaosheng. So while Xinlan Lianda moved from the north to south, through the north-south axis, but other people moved from Shanghai. So he finished his high school in Shanghai under Japanese occupation. As like many of these patriotic youth, they did not want to live under the Japanese. So they hiked all the way with his friend. For 2,000 kilometers all the way to Sichuan, to the so-called Free China under Chiang Kai-shek's government. He went there, he first went to the dental school, but then he quit. He wanted to save the masses. Dentistry just served a few. And he chose the philosophy. It's kind of like a Lu Xun, right? Use philosophy to awaken the people. But once he saw that the advertising to hire interpreters, he volunteered in 1943. So he was very early. And luckily we can find documents showing the dates he joined. He transferred to Chongqing, to Kunming, near the front line, Li Xiaosheng, right, that's his name. And they were trained in this Kunming, this infantry this is the interpreter training school, and he had, this is from the Chinese archives, and his performance review, right? He was a Da-yi, so he was a college freshman, but his performance was liang, or yu liang, good. And then he was shipped to, after brief service in China, Yunnan, he was flown to Burma, to the battle, where the Allies were fighting one of the most epic battle, drawn-out battle, the Battle of Myitkyina. So Myitkyina is an important city in northern Burma. The Chinese, American Allied force want to take this place, take this city. So General Stilwell mobilized 14,000 Americans, 4,000 Chinese, their special force to attack the city, surprise attack. So they marched more than 100 kilometers through the deep jungles, made a surprise attack on the city. They took the airstrip, and it seems the city is going to fall. Instead, it didn't. So General Stilwell flew into the city with all these reporters, not with weapons, the most needed weapons. So, but the battle became, it dragged on for 80 days. So you can see there were a lot of casualties happened on the airstrip. They couldn't take the city. The Japanese counterattacked. So you see there's a big, heavy casualties. A lot of operations were done in the open by this American missionary Dr. Gordon Seagrave. So here the Life magazine had all these photos. You can see all the operations in the open. And this Lee, he joined the battle in July. So during the battle, how many people were killed? Chinese 900, Americans, almost 300 Americans were killed. That's a huge casualties. You can see this mass grave after the war. So he was flown from China, rushed to the front line to join this battle. And luckily we found the documents. This is from the Chinese archive, Guan. You can see the dates. He was flown in June. So he fought there at least for 50 days in this battle as an interpreter for the field hospital. When the city was taken, when Myitkyina was won, but then the troops continued the march south, and the U.S. Signal Corps took a picture, a random picture, without any caption, but because his look is so unique, so striking, and people identify him obviously as Li Xiaosheng. Yeah, so you can see the close-up. That's him. So you do a National Archive, you find photos. People are going to recognize. Yeah. And what about the third one? So the third volunteer, the old volunteer to join the military. So Huang Tiancai, he enrolled in this Central Political School, which is the predecessor of today's National Chengchi University in Taiwan. So he joined in 1943. 1944, he volunteered to join the youth army. He wanted to go to fight in Burma, but the training regiment eventually was disbanded. So he volunteered for different services, but he was denied admission because his health wasn't great for Air Force or Navy. In the end, he applied to take a test to join the interpreter program, but his spoken English was so poor, so he was rejected. So he begged the interviewer. So this is from the interview I did with him 2007 to 2008 when I was doing 2009 when I was doing research on the Korean War POWs. He later became an interrogator. So he told the interviewer, the examiner, he said, "I tried so hard to serve my country. How come I always get rejected? It's your country owe me, not I owe my country. You must let me serve." Because he didn't want to go back to school because he felt it would be very embarrassing for him to go back to school. He failed all the tests, all these services. Yeah, eventually he was admitted. He joined as an interpreter. So, and also we can find the dates of these events from the documents. So the war came to an end in August, and on September 9th, in Nanjing, so the Japanese surrendered in Nanjing formally. So here we can find some of the photographs from the event. You can look at this man. Actually, does he look like somebody, right? Look like Kenneth Wu. Kenneth Wu, right? Probably the same person. Actually, eventually I found his son. So I showed him, I emailed him this photograph. Is this your father? He said, "No, that's not my father, that's my uncle." That's your uncle. But so here, there's another photograph from the Signal Corps took. So the caption says, "This is Kenneth Wu, and that's his little brother, Willie Wu." Willie Wu. They both joined the U.S. Army or served as interpreters. But I asked Kenneth's son, he said, "Do you have a little younger uncle?" He said, "No, I don't have an uncle called Willie." I don't know. This can't Yeah. So after the war, of course, they don't need it. The interpreters. Most interpreters resume their civilian life. But Kenneth was different because he was not a Chinese citizen because he was a British subject. So because this is his liminal space, right, his identity, he could enroll in the U.S. Army. Eventually, 1947, he was naturalized as an American citizen. He continued to serve in the U.S. his military in China. But other Chinese interpreters, they just returned. They were discharged. And Li Xiaosheng, he returned to Wuhan University, and he married his classmate. He finished in the foreign language department. So while he was at Wuhan Daxue, most probably he overlapped. I'm sure he overlapped with Qi Bangyuan, now the famous writer. They both were in the same department, maybe just 1 year apart because she did not go to army. He left for 2 or 3 years, so he became 1 year behind. But both of them recall one major incident actually changed Li Xiaosheng's life, not Qi Bangyuan's life. So in 1947, the nationalist government sent the secret police and troops onto the campus of their dormitory to arrest this alleged communist spies. And students and teachers, they resisted. Then the troops fired into the dorms, and 3 students were killed, including Li Xiaosheng's close friend from the same hometown. And that's from the time we have this memorial service, this funeral. And then Qi Bangyuan was made to give a eulogy in this event. And she recalled, she went through a war. She saw this death was a killing, but this time is the most gruesome death because these classmates' head was blown up by bullets. Of course, it didn't how much impact had it on her, probably not directly, because she found a job in Taiwan. So she went to Taiwan in 1947. That's pretty early. And other people actually followed the footsteps to Taiwan, not for political reasons, just because they need a job. So when Huang Tiancai graduated from National Zhengzhi University, he could not find a job. Actually, he was assigned, this is a government school and the party school for the Nationalist Party. He had a job assignment in Qingdao, but Qingdao at that time had been surrounded by the communists. He couldn't go there, so he couldn't find a job. He couldn't find a job in wartime China. So the only job available to him was to serve in the U.S. MAG, Military Assistance and Aid Group in Taiwan. So he went to Taiwan to to resume his old job as an interpreter for the U.S. advisors in Taiwan. But of course, after the Civil War, the Americans pulled out from China, and also Truman decided to abandon Taiwan in early 1950. So the U.S. advisory group left Taiwan, and he became a reporter. Right? And when Korean War broke out, things changed. Kenneth Wu, he was summoned from California to Korea to first as the interrogator of prisoners. Then he went to Panmunjom. They needed interpreters. So one thing you have to keep in mind, because Kenneth Wu, he was overseas Chinese. His Chinese education actually quite limited. So probably his Chinese is not up for the task for the precise translation. So he needed help from others. But he was the #1 interpreter at Panmunjom. This is Underwood, right? That's the Underwood brothers that also serve as the interpreters for the Koreans. So for 25 months, he was the main interpreter at Panmunjom. However, he needed help from others. Where did the help from? From Taiwan. So the nationalists, MacArthur, hired 75 or 73 interpreters from Taiwan. So they worked behind the scene at Panmunjom. So that's from the arbitrary website or video made of this person, this interpreter from Taiwan. From the tent, you can see that's Panmunjom. That's not Taiwan. It's helicopter at the time. That's the Panmunjom era, the Korean War era. And Huang Tiancai did not go to Panmunjom, but he served on the front line. He served with the 1st Marines on the 38th parallel. He interrogated prisoners. Eventually, 2009, he published a book about his experience, My Life on the 38th parallel. And here we have a lot of photographs of him interacting with the Americans. And I went to his house, scanned his color photo, of him. And eventually, that's about 2010, 2009, he published the book. And what about Li Xiaosheng? He remained in China. Of course, after witnessing the killing of his classmate, he didn't want to go to Taiwan. But even he wanted to, he could not. He was nobody, right? He could not get a plane ticket to go to Taiwan. It's not everybody can freely go to Taiwan. So he stayed in China, worked as a teacher, but when the Korean War broke out, when the communists took over, actually he volunteered with his former interpreter friend. They wanted to provide their service for the communist army. He said, we were military interpreters, but they were turned away. We don't need former nationalists. So he returned to high school, worked as a high school teacher, English teacher. But very soon the communists started this thorough reform campaign. So it's not very clear he volunteered or he was forced to join this revolutionary university, which is an indoctrination school, and where he volunteered to go to Korea. And he went to Korea. He served as an interpreter, where he served as an interpreter in the prisoner camp in Pyeongchang, where they interned all these several thousand UN prisoners. And what's his job? His job was to translate and to censor UN prisoners' letters home. So the communists want to keep record what's written and what should be deleted. So that's what he did. When he returned to, after the war, he returned to his home province in Jiangsu, became a teacher. But in 1957, he was branded a rightist, and he was banished in northern Jiangsu, and he came back. 1958, 62 actually very significant, right? That's the period of the Great Leap Forward and the Great Famine. So when he was in this labor camp, his son, Yin Yuan, went to visit his father. But on that day, his son wrote this, when he died, they wrote this article remembering his father. They came to this prison camp to visit him, but there was no extra bed for them. They lived in this kind of hut. But on that day, because of starvation, one of the fellow inmates died. So they thrown him out. So his son had a bed space in that little hut. So he was in and out of this prison camp called Revolution. He was in the exile in northern Jiangsu again, Subei. What about the other two? What's their fate? How different? So Wu Jianzhan, immediately after the armistice agreement was signed, he was transferred to Taiwan because the head of the MAC knew him, wanted him to be his interpreter and staff officer. He went to Taiwan, worked for General Chase, and he continued to serve 3 commanding generals until 1962. And there was an interesting incident in 1957. That's the first and the last and the largest anti-American riot in Taiwan, because there was a case, the American officer called Robert Reynolds, he killed a Chinese citizen at the Taiwanese, Chinese nationalist, low-ranking cadre. And he was court-martialed, but eventually he was acquitted. And of course, all these, the judge or the witness were all Americans, and the jury all American soldiers. So the Chinese mob probably is instigated by Jiang Jingguo, Chiang Kai-shek. They ransacked the American embassy in Taipei. So of course, at this time, Huang Tiancai, that interpreter, Taiwanese interpreter, he returned to Taiwan. He wrote several articles, very critical of the U.S. government, and the U.S. government actually kept a record of what he said, what he wrote. So later, when he applied for a visa, he was denied. He wanted to come to the U.S. to study, was denied by the Americans. Knew his record. But what about this Kenneth Wu? What did he do? But during the trial, he served as a witness about using his language ability to explain. There's certain controversy about certain words said between the victim and the surgeon Reynolds. So he says, 什么5秒还是54秒? It's 5 second, 5 second, 4 second, or 54 seconds. So that's what he did. Very simple to say. Okay, in Chinese, there's no confusion. But whatever his contribution, I don't think that's terribly important. Just his name appeared in the news. Yeah, he was a language witness. Yeah, we can see he from the Taiwan official document, you can see he were present in some of its high-level meetings. So you can see he played some kind of important role. But after Taiwan, he moved on to Vietnam. So this is the part I want to know more about, but I haven't started doing research. And what he did in Vietnam, so he was the chief of the HINT, right, Human Intelligence Section, Explorative Division. So that's dealing with prisoners. Obviously, the U.S. military in Vietnam trying to use his expertise from Korea in framing their prisoner policy in Vietnam. But we all know, in Vietnam, no one ever mentioned this whole idea about voluntary repatriation, give prisoner choice. Obviously, he learned the lesson. It did not work. Yeah. So later, he returned to the U.S. After he retired from the military, he became a congressional aide. He worked in Washington on the Capitol Hill. So you know the Roth? He worked for Senator Roth. Everybody have the Roth IRA? Maybe he played a role. I don't know. Yeah. What about Huang Tiancai? Right. His application to come to study in the U.S. was rejected. Instead, he just stayed in Taiwan, and he rose up in the Nationalist Party, and he went to he was dispatched by the Central News Agency to Japan, where he befriended this guy. It's a famous painter, Zhang Daqian. And Zhang Daqian, they became very close, and he got a lot of paintings from Zhang Daqian. So that's a few years before he died. He auctioned off all these fans painted by Zhang Daqian. Made a lot of money, but of course that's all for his kids. So this is another Lang Jingshan. This is one of these great Chinese photographer and calligrapher. So he put this couplet, right? Tiancai, right? He put these 2 words into this couplet. So he was very successful politically and financially, and in the art circle. Yeah. So for Li Xiaosheng, he remained in China. So he was in and out of labor camps. Not until 1980s, he was relatively free, but he's just a high school teacher. So here, that's the end of the story of these three men. So I just want to emphasize the interpreters. They were everywhere, but they were nowhere to be seen in history. So we want to, maybe we should write the history through the lens of these interpreters. We're going to have a different understanding how history were made and how history were experienced for these individuals. And they were indispensable and invisible, anonymous. So they are the bridges between worlds, but their loyalty is usually questioned by both sides, especially for those remained in China. For Huang Tiancai, that interpreter of Taiwan is quite unique. So he had a very successful career. But for Kenneth Wu, was his loyalty questioned by the U.S. government? I don't know. Probably because his skill is so unique and so needed. So I never had a chance to interview him. He passed away in 2018. I didn't realize that until I checked the Washington Post obituary. But I think during the war, so their service was so important, but it's just not recorded. So I want to write a story about these people, and the meaning can be multifaceted. And I hope in the coming years we'll learn more about them and come up with a sharper narrative, tell a good story, good enough story about this man and how this young man experienced the war and the revolution in between different empires. Okay, thank you.